In hormonal regulation of the female reproductive system, basically the brain releases hormones that control the ovary. Those hormones are going to cause the ovary to do two main things, to produce an oocyte that is ovulated, and then also to produce ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So when we're looking at the menstrual cycle in particular, we know that LH and FSH from the brain are going to regulate what's happening in the ovary, and the ovary is going to release estrogen and progesterone. And what we look at with the menstrual cycle is the effects of estrogen and progesterone on the endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus. Okay, so more specifics, just like in the male system, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called gonadotropin-releasing hormone, and that hormone circulates to the anterior pituitary gland. And in response to GnRH, the anterior pituitary releases two hormones, LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone. Both of these hormones are going to have an effect at the level of the ovary, but at the start of the menstrual cycle, it's follicle-stimulating hormone that has the biggest effect on the ovary, because you can kind of tell by the name of the hormone what's going to happen here. Follicle-stimulating hormone is going to stimulate follicles to mature. So some follicles are going to respond to FSH and they're going to grow bigger. So in other words, it's under the effect of FSH that primordial follicles will respond and grow into primary follicles, which mature into secondary follicles, which could eventually turn into a vesicular follicle. That's all under the influence of FSH, and this is part of the ovarian cycle known as the follicular phase. This picture is zeroing in on the ovarian cycle, and this is the period of time that we're talking about. It's called the follicular phase, where follicles are responding to FSH and growing into a mature vesicular follicle. The granulosa cells within the follicle grow in number, and the granulosa cells are secreting estrogen and progesterone, but primarily estrogen at this point in time. And so if we look at estrogen levels during the follicular phase of the ovary, we can see estrogen levels going up, getting high. Now, what is the effect of estrogen on the endometrium? We can see the effect that estrogen is having on the endometrium in this part of the diagram. Here they're showing us the endometrium, and I can see that when estrogen levels go up, the endometrium is getting thicker and thicker, and this is what's known as the proliferative phase of the endometrium because it's getting thicker. So just to put that all together and review, we understand that the anterior pituitary is releasing LH and FSH, and those hormones are having an effect at the level of the ovary, and the ovary in turn is secreting estrogen and progesterone, and those hormones are affecting the endometrium. So taking a look at what we've seen so far, here we can see LH levels in blue and FSH levels on the red line. So both LH and FSH are being secreted. We said that at this point in time during the menstrual cycle, it's FSH that's having a very important role causing maturation of the follicles, and that as the follicle matures, estrogen levels go up. The orange line is showing us what estrogen levels are, and we can see that estrogen is getting very high during this point in time. And that high estrogen level is causing the endometrium to proliferate, to get thicker. And so when there is a mature follicle in the ovary, estrogen levels peak. And those high estrogen levels are going to trigger the anterior pituitary to release a big burst of LH. And that's what we can see there. This is known as the LH surge. And the LH surge is going to cause two things to happen. It's going to cause ovulation to occur, and LH, luteinizing hormone, it's going to cause formation of the corpus luteum from the ruptured follicle that's left behind in the ovary. Okay, so what I did is I drew a line right through our chart showing where ovulation is occurring. Because leading up to ovulation, we know that the estrogen levels coming from the ovaries got really high, and you can see that estrogen level is peaking just prior to ovulation because we said that high estrogen level is going to cause the LH surge. LH surge is going to cause ovulation and then cause formation of the corpus luteum. Let's take a look at the ovarian hormones. When the vesicular follicle ruptures, look at that drop in estrogen level. Makes sense, right? Because the follicle was damaged. But as the corpus luteum forms, it secretes primarily progesterone. And so you can see the green line represents progesterone levels, and progesterone levels are getting very high while the corpus luteum is working. What is the effect of progesterone on the endometrium? Taking a look at the endometrium, you can see that the thickness of the endometrium has plateaued. It's not just getting thicker and thicker like we saw under the influence of estrogen, but what you might notice is that it's becoming more glandular. So these are uterine glands that they're showing us, and it's also becoming more vascular. And so in other words, the endometrium is becoming a richer environment during this time. This is known as the secretory phase of the uterus. And the secretory phase of the uterus is preparing the endometrium for implantation, and that's occurring under the effects of progesterone. That's one thing that we can see as a direct effect of progesterone. But what we can't see in this picture is that progesterone levels, when they're high, inhibit FSH and LH. And if you inhibit FSH and LH, due to the low level of LH, the corpus luteum starts to die off. And if the corpus luteum starts to die off, you can see progesterone levels start to die off, start to go down. And if progesterone levels decline, what will happen is that will not sustain the endometrium. And so the endometrium actually starts to die off, and we can see the endometrial thickness getting lower here, and this is what's known as the menstrual phase of the uterus. The menstrual phase is when the endometrium, the stratum functionalis of the endometrium, is shed as menstrual flow. Now keep in mind, because progesterone levels significantly go down, LH and FSH are no longer inhibited, which brings you right back to the start of this cycle. Taking a quick look at a typical 28-day cycle, day 1, by definition, is the start of menstrual flow. And then for the first 2 weeks, what will happen is LH and FSH will be secreted from the anterior pituitary. FSH is going to cause a follicle to mature in the ovary, which is going to secrete high estrogen levels, which is going to cause the endometrium to grow thicker and thicker. When estrogen levels peak, that's going to trigger the LH surge from the anterior pituitary that will cause ovulation around day 14. Estrogen levels will drop, but the corpus luteum will start to form and progesterone levels will go up. Under the influence of high progesterone levels, the endometrium will become very vascular and glandular, but also that high progesterone level is going to inhibit LH and FSH secretion, eventually killing the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum dies off, progesterone levels go down, and that takes about 2 weeks. So day 28, and then as soon as menstrual flow starts, again, you're back at the beginning, day 1.